No matter what I talk about a living Jesus, because to me, there's nothing to preach if you don't think Jesus is really alive, and not just in the cosmos, but inside of us. And because he's alive inside of us, I think we can even take some instruction once in a while. We can even hear what maybe we should do once in a while. So last night, I talked about do the truth. I took that from John 3, where Jesus said, whoever doeth or whoever does the truth then walks out of the darkness into the light. That was a do sermon. Do the truth. Let me give you a don't sermon tonight, all right? So if we start with a do, we advance to a don't. I found that you can't start in a lot of churches with a don't because people won't listen. Got to start with a do. You can work your way to a don't, and then it'll be a little bit easier to kind of walk into. This one is a little bit of a hinky title. I'll meet you in Matthew 20, and I want to give you a moment to get to the first book of the New Testament, and I'm going to read for you most of, if not all of, one of my favorite parables in the New Testament. And I want to title this tonight, Don't Be a Buster. And by buster, I don't mean someone who knocks things over or busts things up, but I mean it sort of in the classic word for buster. And I'll tell you why I'm using that in just a moment. No, there is no word in the English that translates directly to buster in the Greek. But I do want to present that we actually get pretty close. And before we read any, let me set that up with this, because that title's all you'll think about anyway. You keep waiting on Buster to show up in this message, so let's go ahead and deal with him, all right? The word friend in the New Testament is almost always translated from the Greek word philos. And there's a fondness inside of that word where we get the city of one of the 7 churches in the book of Revelation, Philadelphia, which is city of brotherly love. There is a love and an affection that is in that Greek phrase, phileo, philos, Philadelphia. Anytime you have that pretext or that root, you're dealing with an affection. And that's why the English translators take the Greek word philos and often translate it into the word friend, because oftentimes, like for instance, when Jesus says, I call you friend, well, that's a great moment of affection. That's where the Lord Jesus is looking at his disciples, and then we see him looking at us, as we should, and he's saying, you're not just my servants, you're not my slaves, you're my friends. You and I are on intimate relations because you share with your friend what you don't share with your enemy. You share with your friend what you don't share with a stranger. And so a friend is a little closer to the inner circle. They might not be all the way to family, which is really tight, moms, dads, husbands, wives, kids, brothers, sisters, but they're on that next circle at least. They're friends, and you realize that friends can be so close they actually sort of take the place of family sometimes. You get closer to a friend than you do your own sibling or your own parent. There's nothing unnatural about that. That's human affection. That's because people begin to fill holes in our lives of things we've lost, or they begin to replace things that we've left behind because it's a different season in our lives. It's why we don't hold on to the same friends in adulthood that we had in childhood. We have a few of them, but you know the dynamics of your friendships change. Sometimes the friends that you had in childhood were friends because they rode your bus and they lived on your street and they got put on your little league team. And then you were friends till like you were 18 and you couldn't wait to get rid of some of them because you were like, I don't know how we ended up being friends in the first place. 3rd grade isn't a good place for me to make lifelong friends. That's just kids I play on the monkey bars with. Then you start choosing your friends, and then your friends choose you, and then they sort of come and go. And the Bible has that as a word that is used for sort of moving into an intimacy with Jesus. That we've gone past legalism, we've gone past the law, we've gone past performance. I'm not just trying to get to heaven. I'm not trying to get God to love me. I realize he loves me. I realize I'm forgiven. I realize I'm a son. He calls me friend. What have we done? We've moved from enemies to strangers, from strangers to friends. We're getting closer and closer to the heart of God. In my opinion, that's Christian growth. There is such thing as Christian growth. It's sort of growing into the realization that I'm tight with him. I'm on intimate terms with him. We're buddies. We are friends. He can call me his friend. And then Matthew, unique among the 4 Gospels, takes another Greek word and uses it, and the translators didn't really know what to do with it. And so it ends up 3 times. Matthew's the only writer in the New Testament, by the way, that ever uses this word. But Matthew ends up using it 3 times in his gospel. And it's a word that the English translators translate as friend. Let me show you this first one, and then we'll read the story in a moment. In Matthew chapter 20, verse 13, and I know I've given you no context for this verse, but that will not be what we will do with this verse. That's just to set the stage, okay? We'll give you context. Look at verse 13 of Matthew 20. But he answered, he being Jesus, or he being the master of the vineyard, he answered one of them and said, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius?" You've probably already figured out that this is the parable of the workers in the vineyard. And we're going to walk through this parable in a moment. But nutshell version of the parable of the vineyard, workers in the vineyard is they agree to work for a day's worth of pay. And they get to the end of the day and it's paycheck time. And they're not happy with what everybody gets paid. We'll start there. And so they come to the master, they come to the Lord of the vineyard, and they say, "This isn't fair. We don't like this." And the master says, "Friend," reread it again in verse 13, "Friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius?" And Matthew uses the word here. He does not use the word philos, because philos is that friend of affection. That's an intimacy. That's someone of whom you have spent time with, you've went down the road with, you've made a relationship, classically the word we would use for friend. But they didn't know what to do. When the translators got a hold of the Greek word heteros, they didn't really know how to handle it, because heteros is a comrade, but there is no affection in heteros in the Greek. It is an acquaintance that you might call a friend that does not hold the intimacy of a friend. So I tried to get to the bottom of what does heteros really sound like. The translators didn't know what to do with it, so they called it friend, although heteros and philos should never be in the same camp, because a philos is somebody you love, somebody you want to be around, somebody you're happy about, somebody you've built a relationship with. A heteros is not someone that you've built a relationship with. Maybe we would call him a fringe friend. Maybe we call him an acquaintance. I read a Greek scholar that said the best thing I can come up with is this would be, "Hey, Buster, listen up." And the moment I read that, I went, well, there we go. 3 points, a poem and a song and an illustration. You got yourself a sermon, because Matthew 3 times uses the Greek word for Buster. We're going to just call it the Greek word for Buster. And I told you up front, there's not a true Greek word for Buster, but this is also not the Greek word for friend. So I'm on okay ground. I mean, they're not giving me the right word, so we're going to make one up for ourselves. I like "hey pal" myself once in a while. I like, what's a "hey pal"? Watch it. Because if you say "hey pal" to somebody, that's not what you say to your friend. That's what you say to a guy that stepped a little too close. That's what you say to a guy who's trying to push it a little too close into the intimate circle. And you go, "Hey pal," take a step back. "Hey, Buster, listen up." So I do find it a little bit amusing that Matthew, alone of all of the New Testament writers, decides to drop the word heteros in.